At my daughter's wedding, I overheard her tell her wealthy mother-in-law, "She's just a pathetic failure, nothing like you." So when it came time for the toasts, I stood up and played a message her deceased father had recorded before he died. The room went completely silent. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. But first, let me back up and explain how I got to that moment. My name is Dorothy Williams. Most people call me Dot. I'm 68 years old. And until 2 weeks ago, I truly believed my daughter Sarah respected me. I was wrong about a lot of things. The wedding was everything Sarah had dreamed of since she was 12. The Ashford family estate in Connecticut. Manicured gardens, a mansion that looked straight out of a movie. 200 guests. A 12-piece orchestra. Enough flowers to stock an entire florist shop. Michael Ashford's family had money, the kind that goes back generations, and Sarah had landed exactly what she'd always wanted. That morning, I'd driven up from my small apartment in Hartford, wearing the navy dress I'd bought especially for the occasion. It wasn't designer, but it was respectable, or so I thought, until I saw the other guests. The women wore clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, diamonds that could blind you, and carried that particular confidence that comes from never having to check a bank balance. Sarah looked absolutely stunning in her grandmother's vintage Chanel wedding dress, the very dress I had carefully preserved for 40 years. It was the same dress I wore when I married her father, Frank. Back when we believed love alone was enough to build a life. She'd insisted on wearing it, and I was foolish enough to think it meant something sentimental. How naive I was. The ceremony was perfect, if you like that sort of thing. I sat in the second row, right behind Sarah's college roommate and her husband. Patricia Ashford, Michael's mother, occupied the front row wearing pearls that likely cost more than my car. She'd been politely cold to me since we met 8 months ago. The kind of coldness wrapped in good manners but sharp enough to cut. During the cocktail hour, I was standing near the terrace doors when I heard Sarah's voice. She was speaking to Patricia by the flower arrangements, probably thinking the music would cover their conversation. But I've always had excellent hearing, a blessing and a curse, as any mother will tell you. "Don't worry about her," Sarah said, glancing in my direction. "She's just a pathetic failure. Nothing like you. She's never accomplished anything worthwhile. I mean, she worked at the public library for 30 years. Can you imagine anything more depressing?" Patricia nodded approvingly. "Well, at least she knows her place. Some people from simpler backgrounds can be so pushy about inserting themselves where they don't belong." My hand tightened around my champagne glass. Simpler backgrounds, as if dignity and hard work were something to be ashamed of. I thought about the double shifts I'd worked to put Sarah through college. The sacrifices Frank and I made so she could have music lessons, summer camps, every opportunity we'd never had. That's when I remembered the letter in my purse. Frank had given it to me a week before he died, with strict instructions. "If Sarah ever treats you badly," he'd said, his voice weak but determined, "you read this out loud. Promise me, Dot. She needs to hear what I really thought about some things." I'd carried it with me ever since, never imagining I'd actually need to use it. But standing there, listening to my daughter describe me as a pathetic failure to a woman who clearly saw me as beneath her notice, I realized Frank had seen something coming that I hadn't. He'd been watching Sarah change during his final months, and he hadn't liked what he was seeing. The reception dinner was a blur of forced smiles and polite small talk. I sat at table 8, strategically placed far enough from the head table to be out of sight, but close enough to avoid looking deliberately exiled. My dinner companions were distant relatives of Michael's family. Polite people who chatted about the weather and the beautiful flowers while carefully avoiding any questions about what I did for a living. I picked at my salmon and watched Sarah work the room like the politician she'd always wanted to be. She'd graduated from Yale with a degree in public relations and now ran social media campaigns for wealthy clients. She was good at it. I had to admit she knew exactly how to present herself, how to make people feel important, how to say all the right things. Tonight, she was the perfect bride, gracious, radiant. Everything a rich family could want in a daughter-in-law. But I knew the real Sarah, the one who used to call me in tears when her rent was due in college. The one who moved back home for 8 months after a disastrous breakup in her 20s. The one who sat by Frank's bedside during his final weeks, holding his hand and promising to take care of me after he was gone, or so I'd thought. During the father-daughter dance, they played "The Way You Look Tonight," Frank's favorite song. Since Frank wasn't there to twirl her around the floor one last time, Sarah danced with Michael instead. I watched her smile and laugh, seemingly untouched by her father's absence. When the song ended, she didn't even glance at the empty chair where I'd placed Frank's photo. That was the moment I knew I had to read Frank's letter, not to hurt Sarah, but to understand what had happened to the daughter I thought I knew. I slipped away during the dancing and found a quiet corner in the mansion's library. The Ashfords probably owned more books than our entire town library, though I suspected most of them were just for show. From my purse I pulled out the envelope Frank had given me. His handwriting shaky but unmistakable for Dorothy only if you need it. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Frank's careful script. Dated just 3 days before he died. My dearest. It began. If you're reading this, it means Sarah has shown you who she's become, not who she used to be. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this will hurt, but you need to know what I observed during my final weeks. My heart pounded. But I forced myself to keep reading. Sarah has been different since she started seeing Michael. Not just happy different, calculated different. She's been asking questions about our finances, about my will, about what would happen to you after I'm gone. When I asked why, she said she was worried about your future. But I've been watching her. And I don't think worry is the right word. Chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the library's air-conditioning. Yesterday, she brought me papers from a place called Meadowbrook Manor, an assisted living facility. She said she'd been researching options for your future, places where you could be properly cared for after I died. She had brochures, pricing information, even a waiting list application. When I asked why she thought you'd need assisted living at 68, she said it was just planning ahead. The letter went on for another page, each observation more devastating than the last. Frank describing Sarah's impatience with his medical needs, her remarks about the cost of my medications, her suggestions that maybe I was getting too old to live alone safely. I changed my will. Everything goes to you now with instructions that she can't contest. But more than that, I want you to remember that the daughter we raised is still in there somewhere. She's just lost her way. Don't let her convince you that you're a burden. You are the best thing I ever did with my life. And if she can't see that, it's her loss, not yours. It was signed simply, forever yours, Frank, with a postscript that made my hands tremble. P.S. I saw the Meadowbrook Manor brochure in her purse again today. She's planning something. Don't let her do it. When I finished reading, I sat frozen in that elegant library, surrounded by books that probably cost more than most people's cars. At last I understood why Frank had made me promise to use the letter if I ever needed to. He had spent his final days not just fighting cancer, but protecting me from a daughter who saw his death as an opportunity rather than a loss. I returned to the reception with Frank's words echoing in my mind. His letter wasn't a dramatic revelation or a complicated investigation, just the careful observations of a dying man who had noticed his daughter's growing coldness and selfishness. But those quiet details painted a picture that shattered my heart. Sarah hadn't suddenly turned cruel. She had been planning my future behind my back, researching ways to have me declared incompetent or unsafe to live alone. Frank had seen it happening and warned me the only way he could. I watched Sarah accept congratulations from the guests, her smile bright and perfectly practiced. Now I could see what Frank had noticed, the calculated way she measured every interaction, the faint impatience when someone took too long to speak, the careful deflection whenever a topic threatened to tarnish her new status. Mrs. Williams? A young man appeared at my elbow, one of Michael's cousins, though his name escaped me. Michael wanted me to make sure you're enjoying yourself. Can I get you anything? I managed a polite smile. I'm fine, thank you. It's a beautiful wedding. The Ashford family certainly knows how to throw a party, he agreed, lowering his voice. Though between you and me, he said with a conspiratorial smile, it's nice to see Michael settling down with someone so practical. After some of the socialites he used to date, Sarah seems refreshingly down-to-earth, practical, down-to-earth. If only he knew what my so-called down-to-earth daughter was planning for my immediate future. I thanked him and moved away, needing room to think. The irony was overwhelming. Here was Sarah, desperate to climb into high society, surrounded by people who admired her for the very qualities she was trying to shed: her work ethic, her intelligence, her gift for connecting with others. All traits she'd learned growing up in a modest household with parents who valued character over status. But Frank's letter had revealed something more. Sarah wasn't just trying to fit in with the Ashfords. She was actively trying to distance herself from everything that reminded her of where she came from, including me. I began to study the other guests with new eyes. The women Patricia's age moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of people who had never questioned their place in the world. They carried the quiet security of generational wealth, the kind that means you never worry about a mortgage payment or whether you can afford to retire. That was what Sarah wanted, not just money, but the peace of mind that comes from never having to think about money. And in her mind, an aging mother was a liability that threatened that security. The reception was winding down, but I knew the real evening was only beginning. Frank had given me more than observations about Sarah's plans. He'd given me permission to fight back. if I needed to. And as I watched my daughter play the perfect bride, I understood I was going to need that permission. During the bouquet toss, Sarah looked directly at me and smiled. It was the first genuine attention she'd paid me all evening, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Frank had been wrong. Maybe his illness had made him suspicious of harmless behavior. Then I overheard her talking with Patricia afterward. "Thank goodness that tradition is over," Sarah said, adjusting her veil. "I was worried some desperate woman would knock you over trying to catch it," Patricia laughed. "Well, at least your mother didn't try. At her age, remarriage would be rather pathetic, don't you think?" "Oh, Mom's past all that," Sarah replied casually. "She's focusing on more age-appropriate activities now. Quiet hobbies, simple routines. It's probably better for her to accept the limitations that come with getting older." Limitations. At 68, I was supposed to accept limitations and fade quietly into the background while my daughter built her new life. Frank's letter suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a lifeline. He'd seen this coming and tried to protect me the only way he could. I had a choice to make. I could remain the gracious, unobtrusive mother who never embarrassed her successful daughter. Or I could remember who I really was: Dorothy Williams. A woman who had raised a child, built a career, and stood by a husband through cancer treatment. A woman who deserved far better than being written off as a pathetic failure by her own child. The next morning, I drove back to Hartford with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Frank's letter had given me a new perspective on my recent conversations with Sarah, and I realized I needed to do some research of my own. My first stop was the public library where I'd worked for 30 years. Margaret hugged me warmly the moment I walked in Monday morning. "How was the wedding? I want to hear everything about this fancy family Sarah married into." I'd always loved Margaret's directness. She was 5 years younger than me but had started at the library the same week I did, fresh out of library school and brimming with energy. We'd weathered raises and budget cuts, difficult patrons, and technology upgrades that made us both feel ancient. "It was quite an experience," I said carefully. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something. I'm curious about assisted living facilities in Connecticut, particularly one called Meadowbrook Manor." Margaret raised an eyebrow but didn't ask why. That was another thing I appreciated about her. She understood that information is power, and sometimes you need to gather it before you know exactly how you'll use it. An hour later, we'd compiled quite a file from public records and online reviews. Meadowbrook Manor was indeed exclusive and expensive, but one detail stood out: a program for asset protection that allowed residents to sign over their estates in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care. Even more interesting were the online reviews we uncovered next. Several families had complained about high-pressure sales tactics, about feeling rushed into life-changing decisions during emotional periods after a spouse's death. The state had even investigated the facility twice in the past 5 years for inappropriate marketing to vulnerable seniors. "Well," Margaret said as she printed out the last of our research, "this place certainly seems aggressive about acquiring new residents. And their asset protection program? It looks designed to separate seniors from their money." I thanked Margaret and drove home with a box full of documents that painted a very different picture of Meadowbrook Manor than the glossy brochures Sarah had shown me. But more than that, a plan was beginning to take shape in my mind. Frank's letter had been just the beginning. Now I needed to understand exactly what Sarah was planning and why. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Sarah's old college roommate, Jennifer. Jennifer had been at the wedding and was always more forthcoming than Sarah when it came to family gossip. Under the polite excuse of wanting to send a proper thank you note to the Ashfords, I slipped in a few casual questions about their background. What I learned was enlightening. The Ashfords were wealthy, yes, but their money was relatively new. Michael's grandfather had made his fortune in manufacturing after World War II. Patricia had married into the family 30 years ago and, according to Jennifer's gossipy sources, had spent those decades carefully polishing their social status. "Sarah's so lucky," Jennifer confided. "Patricia's already taking her to all the right charity events, introducing her to the right people. She's even talking about getting Sarah onto some museum boards." After hanging up, I sat in my small apartment and turned everything over in my mind. Sarah wasn't just marrying into money. She was marrying into a decades-long social climbing project, and Patricia clearly saw Sarah as a useful tool: young, educated, presentable, exactly the kind of person who could help maintain their position in Connecticut society. But that still didn't explain Sarah's plans for me until I remembered something Frank had written in his letter. Sarah's growing impatience with the cost of things. My medications, my apartment rent, all the small but steady expenses that come with having an aging parent. I pulled out my checkbook and reviewed my records from the past year. Sarah hadn't been wrong about one thing: my expenses had increased. New arthritis medications, higher insurance premiums, the cost of having my apartment painted after the management company raised the rent. Nothing dramatic, just the slow creep of costs that come with getting older. Then it hit me. Sarah wasn't worried that I needed assisted living now. She was worried that someday I might need expensive care. And if I spent down my savings on long-term care, there would be nothing left for her to inherit. Frank's letter had been about protecting me from Sarah's immediate plans. But my own research revealed something even more disturbing. My daughter didn't see me as a person with needs and feelings. She saw me as a financial liability, a problem to be managed efficiently. That night, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Dorothy. I wasn't going to wait for Sarah to make the next move. I was going to find out exactly what she was planning, and then I'd decide what to do about it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Sarah called to invite me to lunch. She sounded unusually warm and friendly, which immediately put me on alert. Sarah was never warm and friendly unless she wanted something. And after Frank's letter, I had a pretty good idea of what that something might be. We met at a trendy bistro in West Hartford, the kind of place that served tiny portions on oversized plates and charged accordingly. Sarah looked radiant, still glowing from her honeymoon in Italy. She'd always photographed well. But marriage to Michael had given her a new confidence that was almost blinding. "Mom, you look tired," she said, kissing my cheek before we sat down. "Are you sleeping okay? Eating enough? I've been worried about you living alone in that little apartment." I ordered a salad and listened as she talked about the honeymoon, about Michael's family's vacation home in the Hamptons, about the charity boards Patricia was helping her join. It was like listening to someone describe a life out of a glossy magazine. Every detail carefully arranged to impress. Finally, after we'd ordered coffee and dessert, Sarah got to the point. "Mom, Michael and I have been talking, and we're concerned about your future. That apartment you're renting is so small and the neighborhood isn't getting any safer. We think it's time you considered moving somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." "Appropriate?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Well, secure, with medical services nearby. Maybe some social activities," Sarah said with a bright, practiced smile. "Patricia knows about this wonderful senior community about an hour from our house. Very exclusive. Very nice. The waiting list is usually years long, but they have a spot opening next month," Sarah said. I set my coffee cup down carefully. "A senior community? Sarah, I'm perfectly capable of living on my own." "Of course you are right now," she replied. "But this is about planning ahead. Honestly, it would give all of us peace of mind to know you're somewhere safe." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. They have a program where you can transfer your assets, and they guarantee care for life." There it was, the asset protection program Margaret and I had researched. Sarah wanted me to sign over my inheritance, my savings, everything Frank left me, in exchange for a room in an institution where she could visit occasionally and feel virtuous about taking care of her mother. "That's very thoughtful," I said slowly. "But I'm not ready to make that kind of decision yet. I'm enjoying my independence." Her smile tightened. "Mom, I know it's hard to admit you might need help in the future, but Dad's been gone for 3 years now. You can't keep pretending you can handle everything on your own forever." "I'm not pretending anything, Sarah. I'm managing just fine." "Are you?" Her voice sharpened. "Because I've noticed you seem a bit scattered lately, forgetting appointments, missing calls. Patricia mentioned you seemed confused at the wedding, out of place." A flash of anger rose in me. "Confused? I was listening to you call me a pathetic failure. That can be disorienting." Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting me to confront her. "I never said that. You told Patricia I was a pathetic failure who'd never accomplished anything worthwhile. That working at the library for 30 years was depressing." I kept my voice calm. "I heard you, Sarah. That's not, you're taking things out of context," she stammered. For the first time, she looked flustered. "I was just trying to reassure her that you wouldn't be demanding or difficult. By calling me a failure, I meant you have realistic expectations about your place in our lives going forward," she said. But the mask was slipping and I could see the calculation underneath. "Mom, this isn't about what you overheard. It's about being practical. You're 68. You need to start planning for the future." I signaled for the check and reached for my purse. "I am planning for the future, Sarah. I'm planning to live my life on my own terms for as long as I can. And when you can't? When you fall and break a hip, or have a stroke, or develop dementia, who do you think will take care of you then?" The question hung between us. That was the heart of it. She wasn't worried about my present needs. She was terrified of my future ones. She wanted me tucked away somewhere safe, where my aging wouldn't inconvenience her new life. "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it," I said evenly. But when that time comes, I hope I'll still have a daughter who sees me as a person worth caring about. Not just a problem to be solved. Driving home, I thought of Frank's final gift. Not just the letter warning me about Sarah's plans, but the knowledge that he'd seen this transformation in her and tried to protect me from it. Sarah thought she was maneuvering me into a corner. She didn't realize she was showing me exactly how far she'd go to protect her new status. A month after that lunch, Sarah called again. This time, I heard voices in the background. Her tone was formal, almost rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over this evening? Michael and I have some family business to discuss." I agreed, though I already suspected what kind of business she meant. I spent the afternoon rereading Frank's letter, making sure I understood exactly what I was walking into. Sarah and Michael's house in West Hartford was everything she'd always dreamed of. A colonial with perfect landscaping, in a neighborhood where professional salaries and family money were practically required. Sarah had posted dozens of photos online, showing off each room like a magazine spread. When I arrived, Sarah, Michael, and Patricia were waiting in the formal living room. The staging was deliberate, me on one side, the three of them lined up on the sofa. Like an intervention, Dorothy, Patricia began, warm but authoritative. "We wanted to talk to you about some concerns we've all been having." Sarah jumped in quickly. "Mom, you've seemed more forgetful lately, missing appointments, not returning calls." "Small things," Patricia said gently, "but they're adding up." Michael nodded gravely. "We think you might be experiencing some early cognitive changes. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something we need to address proactively." I listened to their carefully rehearsed presentation, my understanding sharpening with every word. They'd built a narrative about my declining mental health. But the so-called evidence wasn't even fabricated, it was just clever distortions of normal life. The appointment I'd supposedly missed? I had rescheduled it myself because of a conflict. The calls I hadn't returned? Telemarketers and Sarah's friend Jennifer. None of them urgent. The good news, Patricia continued smoothly, is that we've already secured you a place at Meadowbrook Manor. They have an opening next week, and we can arrange the transition quickly. All you need to do is sign these papers. Michael opened a folder and slid it across the coffee table. Power of attorney, asset transfer agreements, healthcare directives, everything to make the transition smooth and to protect your interests. I looked at the three of them, these people who thought they could manipulate me into signing away my life with exaggerated concerns about my mental capacity. Sarah sat there nodding, the picture of a concerned daughter, while plotting to inherit everything Frank had left me. "This is quite a production," I said finally. "How long have you been planning this little intervention?" Sarah's smile faltered. "Mom, this isn't a production. We're genuinely worried about you, are you?" I asked, reaching into my purse. The envelope was soft and worn from weeks of being carried. "Because I have something I think you'll all find interesting." I unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read aloud Frank's careful observations about Sarah's questions concerning my finances, her research into assisted living facilities, her growing impatience with the cost of having an aging mother. She brought me papers from something called Meadowbrook Manor. I read, "An assisted living facility." She said she'd been researching options for your future, places where you could be properly cared for after I died. Sarah went white. Michael frowned in confusion. Patricia's calm expression didn't change, but I saw her hands clench in her lap. When I asked her why she thought you'd need assisted living at 68, she said it was just planning ahead. I continued, "But I've been watching her, and I don't think planning is the right word." As Frank's letter laid out his observations of Sarah's calculated approach to my future care, I watched my daughter's face cycle through shock, panic, and finally a cold calculation I had never seen before. When I finished, the room went silent. Then Michael spoke. "Sarah, is this true? Were you researching assisted living facilities while your father was dying?" That's when I realized this confrontation was only the beginning of something much bigger. "That letter proves nothing," Sarah said quickly, but her voice shook. "Dad was sick, probably confused. He was seeing problems that weren't there." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into my purse. "Your father was many things, Sarah, but confused wasn't one of them, especially not about something this important." Michael was staring at the documents spread on the coffee table, the power of attorney forms, the asset transfer agreements, the Meadowbrook Manor paperwork. "Sarah," he said quietly, "when exactly did you start researching this place?" "I was just being prepared," Sarah said defensively. "Someone had to think ahead about Mom's future needs while your father was dying of cancer." Michael's voice was soft but edged with steel. "You were planning to move your mother into assisted living while he was fighting for his life?" Patricia tried to step in. "Michael, I think we should focus on Dorothy's current situation rather than relitigating past decisions." "Should we?" I asked, turning to Patricia. Because I did some research of my own after Sarah mentioned Meadowbrook Manor. Did you know they've been investigated twice by the state? For aggressive marketing to vulnerable seniors? For the first time since I'd known her, Patricia looked genuinely uncomfortable. I'm sure any successful facility faces occasional regulatory reviews. Occasional reviews about pressuring grieving widows to sign over their assets. Immediately after their husbands' deaths? I countered. I pulled out a folder of public records Margaret had helped me compile. Because that's what the state found: high-pressure tactics, rushed decision-making. Families manipulated into making permanent choices during a temporary emotional crisis. Sarah lunged for the papers. Where did you get these? Public records, Sarah. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. I kept the documents out of her reach. The state licensing board, consumer protection agencies, online review sites, all freely available to anyone who bothers to investigate. Before signing their life away, Michael leaned over my shoulder, scanning the documents. Jesus, look at these complaints. Felt pressured to decide immediately. High-pressure sales presentation. Some of these families even regretted signing the asset transfer agreements. Michael said quietly, still scanning the documents. He looked up at Sarah. Did you actually research this place yourself? Or did someone recommend it to you? The silence that followed said more than words. Finally, Patricia spoke. I may have mentioned that they have an excellent reputation in certain circles. I asked mildly, meaning wealthy families looking to warehouse inconvenient relatives? That's a terrible thing to say, Sarah snapped. We're trying to make sure you get proper care. No, I said calmly, standing now. You're trying to make sure I don't become a financial burden on your new lifestyle. The difference is that proper care considers what I want, not just what's convenient for you. Michael kept reading, his brow furrowed. Mom, some of these families sued Meadowbrook. They accused the facility of elder abuse, of manipulating seniors into signing over assets they didn't understand. Patricia's polished composure finally began to crack. Those are isolated incidents. Every industry has a few bad actors, are they? I asked. Because according to these records, Meadowbrook runs a specific program targeting recent widows. They market to families during funeral planning, offer estate protection services, and even get referrals through certain funeral homes and lawyers. I watched the three of them absorb that. Sarah looked like she might be sick. Michael's anger was unmistakable, though I couldn't tell whether it was aimed at his wife or at me for exposing it all. Patricia stayed calculating, no doubt trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Even if the facility has some problems, Sarah said desperately, that doesn't change the fact that you need to plan for your future. You can't live alone forever, Mom. Why not? I asked. I'm 68, not 88. I'm healthy, mentally sharp, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions about where I live. But what if something happens? Sarah's voice rose. What if you fall, or get sick, or need help? You can't expect us to drop everything and take care of you. There it was, the real fear beneath all the talk of my welfare. Sarah wasn't worried about my present. She was terrified that my future needs might interfere with her carefully planned new life. I'm not expecting you to take care of me, Sarah, I said evenly. I'm expecting you to respect my right to make my own choices about how I want to live. Those choices affect other people, Patricia said sharply. Family decisions should be made collectively, considering everyone's interests. Everyone's interests, I repeated. And what exactly are your interests in this situation, Patricia? Patricia straightened, her social mask slipping back into place. My interest is in seeing this family function harmoniously. Sarah is my daughter-in-law now, and that makes her welfare my concern. And my welfare? I asked, does that concern you at all? Of course it does. Which is why we think Meadowbrook would be perfect for you: security, medical care, social activities with people your own age. I had to admire her persistence. Even caught recommending a facility with a questionable reputation. She was still selling institutional living. Patricia, I said gently. I spent 30 years working at a public library. Do you know what that taught me? How to research thoroughly, how to spot inconsistencies in people's stories, and how to help others find the information they need to make good decisions. Michael looked up from the complaint documents. What kind of inconsistencies? Well, for instance, I said, when someone claims to have researched a facility but all their information comes straight from marketing materials instead of independent sources, or when someone is very eager for a particular outcome, but can't explain why the outcome matters to them personally. I looked directly at Patricia. Sarah tried to regain control. Mom, you're being paranoid. We're trying to help you, are you? Because real help usually involves asking what the person wants, not telling them what they're going to do. I sat back down, finally feeling like I was getting somewhere. Sarah, in all these conversations about my future, have you ever asked me what I actually want? Of course we want what's best for you, Sarah said. That's not what I asked. Have you asked me what I want? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Michael finally spoke. What do you want, Dorothy? I want to live in my own apartment for as long as I'm able, I said clearly. I want to make my own decisions about my health care, my finances, and my social life. I want to be treated like a competent adult, not a problem to be managed, I paused, looking each of them in the eye. And I want my daughter to see me as a person worth respecting, not just an obligation to be discharged efficiently. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I do respect you, she whispered. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared something will happen to you. And I won't know how to handle it. For the first time all evening, I heard something real in her voice. Sarah, being scared is normal, I said gently. But fear doesn't give you the right to control someone else's life. I'm not trying to control your life, she shot back. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From making my own mistakes? From living independently? From having the dignity of making my own choices? I reached across the table and took her hand. Sweetheart, I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. I raised you. I supported your father through cancer. I managed a library budget and staff. Why do you suddenly think I'm incapable of managing my own life? Michael nodded slowly. She has a point, Sarah. Your mother seems pretty sharp to me. Patricia tried one more time. But the financial protections at Meadowbrook are designed to protect the facility's revenue stream, not the residents' interests, I cut in. Patricia, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I can read financial documents and I can spot a bad deal when I see one. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin. So what happens now? You just go back to your apartment and pretend this never happened? I go back to my apartment and keep living my life. You go back to yours and stop trying to manage mine. I gathered my purse and stood up. And maybe, if you can learn to see me as an equal rather than a dependent, we can rebuild some kind of relationship. But what if you do need help someday? Sarah asked, then I'll ask for it. And if you're willing to provide it respectfully without trying to take over my life, maybe we can work something out. I paused at the door. But Sarah, if I ever need care, it will be my decision how to handle it. Not yours, not Patricia's, not some facility that sees me as a source of revenue. As I drove home, I realized the evening had gone better than I'd expected. Frank's letter had given me the ammunition I needed. But my own research gave me something even more valuable, the certainty that I was right to resist their pressure. More importantly, I'd caught a glimpse of the real Sarah beneath all the calculation, a young woman genuinely scared of the responsibilities that come with having aging parents. 3 weeks later, Sarah called to ask if we could have coffee. Just the two of us, she said. No Michael, no Patricia, no agenda about your living situation. I was skeptical, but curious enough to agree. We met at a small cafe near the library neutral ground where neither of us had the advantage. Sarah looked different, tired, less polished than usual. Her perfect composure showed cracks I'd never seen before. I've been thinking about what you said. She began without preamble. About not asking what you wanted, about treating you like a problem instead of a person. I waited, curious to see where this was going. I talked to a therapist about it, she continued. About why I was so fixated on getting you into that place. Sarah's hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup, as if she needed its warmth. She asked me when I started being afraid of you getting older. And I realized it was when Dad got sick. That's when I understood that loving someone doesn't protect them from aging or dying, or needing help. Tears pooled in her eyes. I watched you take care of him. And I thought about how someday someone would have to take care of you. And I panicked. This was more honesty than I'd heard from Sarah in years. Why did that scare you so much? I asked, because I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I was strong enough, or patient enough, or good enough to take care of you the way you took care of him. Her voice broke completely. So I convinced myself the solution was to find someone else to do it, someone professional, someone better at caregiving than me. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sarah, no one expects you to be a professional caregiver, but what if you need help? Real help, not just emotional support? She asked softly. What if you get sick like Dad did? Then we'll figure it out together. But that doesn't mean signing away my independence now just because something might happen later. I know that now, she whispered. The therapist explained the difference between planning for possible futures and trying to control them. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin. She also pointed out that I was treating you like you were already incapacitated instead of like someone who could participate in planning for her own future. We sat in silence for several minutes. I thought about Frank's letter, about the daughter he'd tried to warn me about, but I also saw the daughter he'd raised. Scared, imperfect, but capable of growth. What about Patricia? I finally asked. And Michael? Michael was horrified when he really understood what we were planning. Sarah admitted. He said it reminded him of the way his grandfather's business partners had tried to pressure him into selling the company when he developed dementia. Sarah managed a weak smile. Apparently, the Ashford family has some experience with people trying to take advantage of vulnerable seniors. And Patricia is Patricia. She's convinced this whole thing got blown out of proportion, and that we should have just handled the Dorothy situation more quietly. Sarah looked embarrassed. She actually said that. The Dorothy situation, I had to laugh. Well, at least she's consistent. I'm sorry. Mom, I'm sorry for calling you a failure, for trying to warehouse you, for treating you like a burden instead of my mother. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. I don't know if I can be the daughter you deserve, but I'd like to try. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to see me as a person. I squeezed her hand. And maybe ask my opinion before making major decisions about my life. Deal. But Mom, if you ever do need help, real help, not just the normal stuff that comes with aging, will you tell me? Will you let me be part of the solution instead of shutting me out? I considered this carefully. The old Dorothy would have promised to handle everything herself, to never be a burden. But Frank's letter had taught me something about the cost of protecting people from difficult truths. I'll tell you, I said finally. But Sarah, being part of the solution means respecting my choices. Even if they're not the choices you would make, I understand. As we prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated. Mom, there's something else about Dad's letter. I tensed, wondering if she was going to challenge its authenticity or accuse me of manipulating his words. I'm glad he wrote it, she said softly. Not because of what it said about me, but because it meant he was still protecting you even after he was gone. I hope someday I'll be smart enough to love someone that completely. Driving home, I realized the woman I'd raised was still there beneath all the fear and calculation. Rebuilding our relationship would take time, and it would never be exactly what it once was. But maybe with enough honesty and patience it could become something even better. 6 months later, I was reading in my favorite chair when my phone rang. It was Sarah, calling for what had become our weekly check-in. Not to manage my life or push me toward any particular decision, just to talk. How was your week? She asked, and I could hear genuine interest in her voice. Good. I had lunch with Margaret, went to the book club at the library, and started reading that novel you recommended. I settled back in my chair. Robert and I went to a concert on Saturday. There was a pause. Robert was still a relatively new development in my life, a retired English professor I'd met at the library's lecture series. We'd been seeing each other for 3 months, taking things slowly and enjoying each other's company. How are things going with him? Sarah asked carefully. Very well. He's intelligent, kind, and he treats me like an adult capable of making my own decisions. I smiled, knowing Sarah would catch the reference to our earlier conversations. Amazing how refreshing that can be. I deserve that, Sarah laughed. But seriously, I'm glad you're happy. You deserve someone who appreciates you. This was still new territory for us, Sarah showing genuine interest in my happiness, rather than just my welfare. The therapy was helping, but more than that, she seemed to be discovering that having a mother with an independent life was actually more interesting than having one who existed solely to be managed. Speaking of appreciation, I said, how are things with Michael and Patricia? Michael's good. He's been asking more questions about my family, about you and Dad. I think meeting you made him realize that not all mothers-in-law are like his mother. Sarah's voice softened. Patricia is adjusting. She stopped mentioning assisted living facilities. At least that's progress. She asked me last week if you were still harboring resentment about the Meadowbrook situation. I told her that you weren't harboring anything, you'd simply learn to be more careful about trusting her judgment. I laughed. I bet that went over well, about as well as you'd expect. But Michael backed me up, which was good. He pointed out that trust has to be earned back after it's been broken. We talked for another 20 minutes about books, about Sarah's work, about Robert's grandchildren and their upcoming visit. Normal family conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. When we hung up, I realized how much I'd missed this version of my daughter. The next morning, I was surprised to get a call from Michael. Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, Michael began. I wanted to ask you something, of course, I said. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about what happened last year with the whole Meadowbrook situation. I realize I didn't handle it very well. I let my mother push an agenda that wasn't in your best interests. I waited, curious where this was going. I wanted you to know that Sarah and I have talked about it extensively. We've agreed that any future decisions about family matters will include you as an equal participant, not just someone whose life gets planned by other people. I appreciate that. Michael, there's something else, he continued. Sarah mentioned that you might be interested in traveling more now that you're not worried about us. pressuring you into assisted living. This was news to me. She did. She said you'd always wanted to see Ireland but never had the chance. Patricia and I are planning a family trip to Europe next spring, and we'd like you to join us as our guest. I was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected invitation. That's very generous, Michael, but before you say no, let me explain. It wouldn't be a family obligation trip where you'd have to keep up with our schedule or pretend to enjoy activities you don't like. We'd plan some things together, but you'd have plenty of independence to explore on your own. And Patricia is on board with this? Michael laughed. Patricia suggested it. Actually, I think she's finally figured out that having a happy, independent mother-in-law reflects better on the family than having one who feels pushed around and resentful. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in the past year. 12 months ago, Sarah had been planning to put me in an institution and take control of my assets. Now, she was encouraging me to travel internationally and including me in family plans as an equal party. The difference wasn't just in Sarah's attitude. It was in my own willingness to stand up for myself. Frank's letter had given me permission to fight back. But the real change came from recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminished it. A year later, I was packing for Ireland when Sarah arrived at my apartment with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. Excited about tomorrow? She asked, settling into the chair across from my sofa. Nervous and excited, I admitted. It's been a long time since I traveled anywhere more exotic than Hartford. You're going to love it. And Mom, I'm really glad you said yes to the trip. I looked up from folding sweaters. Sarah, can I ask you something? Last year, when you were so determined to get me into Meadowbrook, were you really worried about my safety? Or were you more worried about the inconvenience of having an aging parent? She was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, both. I was scared something would happen to you. But I was also scared of how that would affect my life with Michael. I wanted the peace of mind that comes with knowing someone else was handling the hard stuff. And now? I prompted. Now I realize that the hard stuff is part of loving someone. You can't just outsource the difficult parts of relationships and expect the good parts to remain meaningful. She smiled faintly. Besides, you've proven pretty conclusively that you don't need to be handled by anyone. I laughed, thinking about everything that had brought us to this point. Frank's letter warning me about Sarah's plans, my research into Meadowbrook Manor, the confrontation in Sarah's living room where I finally stood up for myself, and the months of therapy and honest conversations that followed. You know what your father would say about all this? I asked. What? He'd say the best gift he ever gave me wasn't the letter warning me about your plans. It was teaching me that I was worth fighting for. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I think he'd be proud of both of us, you for standing up for yourself, and me for finally learning to see you as a person instead of a problem. He'd definitely be proud. I agreed, and probably relieved that he doesn't have to haunt Patricia for recommending questionable senior living facilities. We both laughed at the image. Patricia had indeed adjusted her approach to our family dynamics, though I suspected it was more about maintaining her social position than any genuine change of heart. But that was fine with me. I didn't need Patricia to love me. I just needed her to respect my autonomy. Mom, there's something I need to say before you leave for Ireland. I stopped packing and turned to give her my full attention. Thank you for not giving up on me, Sarah said quietly. When you played Dad's letter that night, you could have exposed everything I was planning and just walked away. You could have written me off as a selfish daughter who didn't deserve a relationship with you. I thought about it, I admitted honestly, but you didn't, she continued. You gave me the chance to see what I'd become and to choose to be better. Not everyone would have done that. I sat down beside her on the sofa. Sarah, you're my daughter. Not because you're perfect, but because we're family. Real family doesn't disappear when someone makes mistakes. It just means we all have to work harder at being honest with each other. Tears welled in her eyes. I love you, Mom, not for what you can do for me or what you represent in my life, but because you're Dorothy Williams, a woman who worked for 30 years at a job she loved, who raised a difficult daughter with patience and grace, and who had the courage to fight for her own dignity when everyone around her was trying to take it away. As we hugged goodbye, I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of hearing my own daughter call me a pathetic failure. The fear of losing my independence to someone else's convenience. The discovery that I was stronger and more valuable than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Frank's letter had started it all. But the real victory was learning to see myself the way he had always seen me. As someone worth respecting, worth fighting for, and worth loving exactly as I am. Tomorrow I would board a plane for Ireland, not as a burden to be managed by my family, but as Dorothy Williams, A 69-year-old woman finally setting off on the adventure she dreamed of for decades. Some victories don't come with fanfare or celebration. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing you refused to disappear when others tried to make you invisible, and that, I thought as I closed my suitcase, was exactly the kind of legacy Frank would have wanted me to create. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.